From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, real therapists. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or advice you'd like to give, come on over to podtherapy.net and join our conversation. Today on the show, we talk about weed, jealousy, OCD, and we discuss names for you, our loyal listeners. And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy is Jimbo. I'm Nick Tanchman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
Just rename me. Damn it. That's not what the script says, unless it does. I should probably be reading this. What is this?
Yeah, that's your new nickname now is Jimbo.
Yeah, well, that's the most clever name for any guy named
So
Jim.
if you, the listener, listened to our last episode, our bonus episode.
Bing, bing.
If you paid attention all the way to the end, you heard a new voice, which was Laura, my girlfriend, who decided she wanted to come in and just
She
watch
felt like
the
she needed to
recording.
monitor you.
Yeah, so on the way...
It was a cry for help. She was like, I'm here to stop this.
Yeah, she tried to put an end to the podcast.
Yeah.
But on the way over here recording, she's like, do you ever call him Jimbo? I'm like, I do now.
Damn it. Thanks, Laura. You know, the most clever iteration of a nickname that I've ever had in my childhood? Jim Sock. Jim Sock I got for like 6th and 7th grade. And then eventually it just turned into Sock. And all the kids that knew me in high school were like, what's up, Sock? And like nobody knew why I was being called Sock. And like it was really funny. So yeah, Jimbo's a pretty weak sauce, I'm be honest with you. So.
Okay, well, yeah.
But that is not the naming contest.
A new one.
That is not the naming contest that we are doing, Nick. What naming contest are we doing?
Well, we do have a different naming contest.
Yes.
So one of the things that we had talked about, we always refer to our listeners or people who listen to the podcast. And it's always kind of hard to come up with a way of saying that.
Yeah. And
a lot of podcasts name their listeners.
Yeah.
So if you listen to Pod Save America, you're a
friend of the pod.
And if you listen to Penn's Sunday School, you're a member of the congregation.
Right.
Ice Cream Social, they have their Scoops.
Scoops.
So we thought, we should have a name for our listeners.
Yeah. And so we had like, suckers. Poor souls who have found their way into this. And for a long time, we just kept calling it the fan club because we kept like telling anytime we found a new listener, we're like, congratulations, you're president of the fan club. And they're like, wait, no, stop. I didn't. Why are you doing this?
I didn't want to do that.
And so we joked about that for a long time. But this last week and a half ago, actually, we posted on Twitter like, hey, are there any ideas? And actually, we got a few. We got a few ideas, but we realized we should probably open that invitation up to more than just people who happen to be on Twitter at that exact minute when we put it out there. But we got a few.
Yeah. Special thanks going out to Sarah Boyle.
Yeah.
And the famous Paul Mattingly.
Yeah, I've heard about that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, they had some great ones. Theropods.
Theropods was especially interesting. So Sarah put Theropods out there and then explained this is lazy because you guys are lazy and just called it Pod Therapy, right? It's a podcast about therapy. What should we call it? Pod Therapy. So equally lazy, the group is called Theropods. And she said, bonus points, it's a type of dinosaur. So I Googled that. And it is. A theropod is any dinosaur that had 3 toes on its foot. So like Tyrannosaurus Rex is a theropod. So,
that's cool.
Yeah, it was interesting. I thought that was really cool.
I thought that one. And then, Paul Mattingly came up with Therapals.
Therapals was pretty funny. He just like nailed it. He was enthusiastic about that too. Like his tweet took you on a journey. Like his tweet starts off with like a different idea, right? What was his first idea?
No, that was the first one. The second one was couch potatoes.
No, he said couch potatoes, and then he said Therapals, and he's like, that's it, Therapals.
Oh, yeah,
like that
right.
was his explanation point at the end. Like you see his entire thinking process in the tweet. Somebody should explain to him that there's a delete key.
Right.
I think he has too much authenticity. He's like, no, we're going. I'm completely transparent in this tweet. You will see every thought I had as I had it.
Which couch potatoes is really good too.
It was pretty funny. Yeah.
All 3 of those, I would be really excited.
I could see whenever I was playing with those 3, I was like, Therapals works really well because she's like, hey, Therapals. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of playful. And couch potatoes is funny because as therapists, like we generally have couches or, I don't, but, it's pretty normal. And we say sit on the couch, and being on the couch is like being the patient or whatever.
I don't think many people have couches anymore, do they?
Yeah, I've heard of them. Couches. I don't know. What was that chair called that Freud had? That like, was it a chaise? Is that what that was?
Chaise.
Okay.
Chaise.
Oh, what? It's pronounced that?
Yeah.
Really?
I believe so. Correct me, listeners, if I'm wrong. But
I feel like you are. I don't know,
chaise.
but then we probably Americanized it and just called it a chase. But
like the croissant.
Croissant. So just for FYI on the Freud thing, we actually don't use those. We usually just use a chair. Like we face you. We don't point you at the wall and make you lay down. And
don't sit behind you out of sight.
No, we don't do that. Yeah. But I mean, psychoanalysts might still do it, but most don't. And funny side point, Freud admitted the reason he wanted that was not for any psychotherapeutic reason. It's because he thought it was weird when people were looking at him. And he felt uncomfortable.
Really?
That was why he did it, yeah. So anyway, interesting point. So we are all calling, right? We're inviting you, the listener, to give us your ideas. What would you have this group named? What is the plural for the word listener for the group that is part of this? Because one of the things that Nick and I, to come back, and actually by way of reintroduction, Nick, we've agreed that every 10 episodes we will come back to the vision of the podcast, what we're really doing this for. And so when Nick and I, who are real-life therapists, would listen to podcasts, we're both fans of so many different shows, and we thought, man, it's really neat. Podcasting is a great way to talk about great ideas and get information out into the world, but also interact with humans. And we decided to start this podcast because we were like, man, it'd be really cool to destigmatize mental health, to introduce people to what it's like to really meet a therapist. We're not this spooky, weird, guy that you see in like a movie, but we're just really these know-nothing idiots that are just sort of, meandering through your life. And so we thought, let's expose people to what it's really like. But one of the things we're really passionate about is creating like this team of people that, are our listeners who can help us do some really cool things in the community. We want to do things like raise money for really cool things, or, May was Mental Health Awareness Month, and we were like, oh man, we wish we kind of had that team spirit that we could kind of take an issue and run with it and do something productive and, be good people at the world. And so, this is the beginning of that. This is what it looks like to create that kind of a movement. So all ideas welcome, right, Nick?
Yeah, and if you have any ideas, you can tweet to us at podtherapyguys.
Yeah.
Email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com.
Yep.
Or go to the website, podtherapy.net.
And that's actually the fastest, and so you can go on the website, podtherapy.net, and there's a button that says ask us a question, and there's another button that says ask by email, because sometimes if you ask so if you click the button that says ask us a question, a little field text box pops up and just says, what do you want to say? And you don't have to put your name, you don't have to put anything. You just put A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you can hit just OK or send. And it comes straight to us. We get that immediately. No name, no anything.
That's actually, I can't believe we're on like episode 21 and we've never talked about this.
Yeah.
But if you go through the website, you can ask any question you want anonymously, so even we wouldn't know.
Yes. Yeah, we don't know who you are unless you tell us this is Bob, or, you can give yourself a clever name. But a lot of people have expressed, hey, your little anonymous box kind of only allows for about a paragraph of writing, and then it kind of cuts you off. If I have a longer question, how do I submit that? And so that's why we also put the email up there and just said, if you want to just send us that, that's fine too. We'll never read your name if you don't want us to, so don't worry. We don't bother with that stuff. So anyway, if you have a name idea, fastest way, go on the website and just type in as many as you want. Give us like 30 and then just hit submit, or tweet them to us, or email them to us, or put them as comments on our Facebook, facebook.com/podtherapy. But we really want to hear you this week. Come up with any idea. All ideas welcome. And Nick and I are going to go through them and cultivate those, and we will announce the best ones in the next show.
Yep.
And then we will come up with some kind of fun way to put it to a vote. So we will figure out. But we want to name our little community because there's enough of us now that we can form something, and let's have a plural identity.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
That will be fun. So anyway, that's housekeeping news. We are at episode, 21?
21.
We are at episode 21, and we did our first bonus episode last week. We took on the great John Oliver and challenged some things he was talking about with rehabs. If you haven't listened to that, go back and grab that one. It was a lot of fun. And you even get to hear the voice of Laura Cordova, who is Nick's girlfriend, so she does exist, and very exciting. She has a very feminine voice for a 300-pound man with a beard. It was really cool. For a biker, really feminine. Looks really good after the surgery. I grew up with Laura, so I get to tease her. It's fine.
So all right. Well, let's dive into the weeds, into our.
Is that what we're calling it now? Oh, wow, that was very punny.
Oh, I didn't even realize that.
Oh. Yes, and the last episode, Nick started calling this first opening segment Into the Weeds because it's kind of research-driven, and we tell you about something interesting that's coming out into the world, and we comment on it. But this one is punny. And why is that, Nick?
Because it's about weed.
Yay, marijuana. If you are a local Las Vegan, you know that marijuana is legal. And if you are in Colorado, it's legal. In Washington, it's legal. In California now, in LA County, I believe it's legal. And most places have medicinal marijuana. So interesting research came out about the devil's cabbage. So what is that all about, Nick?
Yeah, so apparently it matters how early you start. So actually we should call this the no duh segment, because I think most people in the addictions community kind of realize this with pretty much every substance that's out there. So the study came out from University of Montreal that finds that the odds of developing substance abuse symptoms by age 28 are reduced by 31% for every year of delayed onset of cannabis use in adolescence.
Okay.
So let's kind of break that down.
Yeah.
So essentially what we look at when we study substance abuse dependence, the age of onset, like when the person first started using, is actually a really big deal.
Okay.
If you were an adult and you didn't start using a substance until your mid-20s to late 20s, the odds of you developing substance dependence is actually pretty small. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible, because obviously, as we've seen with the opioid epidemic, people who've never used any drugs at all throughout their entire life, but then had a surgery and became addicted to their prescription painkillers, we know that exists. That does definitely happen. But for the most part, addiction rates drop off in your late 20s.
Right.
If you haven't used by then, the chances of you becoming addicted to something is actually pretty small.
Okay.
So we already knew that, but what this study really indicates is it actually found kind of a tipping point, which is age 15.
Okay.
So
if you use marijuana before age 15.
So for every year prior to age 15, your likelihood of developing, or the odds of developing, increase.
And we're talking about developing an addiction.
Developing an addiction.
Got it. So your odds of developing an addiction at some point in your life get pretty impressively higher if you're using marijuana in adolescence. And it's adding... In fact, every year before 15, we can quantify your odds are 31% higher just because of that.
For every year.
Yeah. But it's not like if you use at 15, you're clear. There's no problem with developing addiction.
No. Right. Yes, exactly. So if you started using early on, your chances of becoming addicted to something are much higher. And we'll kind of break this down, and it actually makes sense because it kind of has a lot to do with, obviously, your brain development.
Yes. Yeah.
So one of the things, I think I mentioned in the last show that I used to work at a treatment center for teenagers.
Yes.
And one of the biggest problems that I came across with was, now that marijuana is legal in Nevada, a lot of the parents that I was interacting with were saying, like, well, yeah, he's smoking weed, but it's not... To me, it's not that big of a deal because, it's going to be legal soon. So I constantly had to remind the parents, it's legal for someone over 21.
Right.
And that that number, 21, wasn't just chosen arbitrarily.
Right.
It was chosen based off of science and brain development.
Yes.
So the effect that marijuana has on a full-grown adult, fully developed brain is different than the effect that it has on a brain that's still developing.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So this is really important stuff to take a look at. Even if marijuana becomes legal, that doesn't necessarily mean that parents should just kind of look the other way and see it as harmless.
Yeah, and so I want to piggyback on that. So a couple of thoughts on this. So marijuana is legal in our state. Okay, it is legal in our community, and we run a rehab. So we have had to interact with this situation quite a bit. And, as substance abuse people, as addictions professionals, we hear people ask us all the time, what's your opinion? Do you think this should be legalized? What do you think is right and wrong on this? And before we get into that, because I actually want us both to weigh in on that, and I will not taint Nick's view, and, he will not taint mine. We will both, before the segment is over, give you our ruling. As addictions experts, do we believe that marijuana should be legalized in a community? But preface to that, Let's start with the first question of, is it inherently harmless? Because what this statistic teaches me, Nick, what this new research is telling me is, in my opinion, I interpret it to address the conversation about gatewayness, right? So people will say, oh, well, for a long time, people were saying you shouldn't legalize marijuana because it's a gateway drug. And their point was marijuana may be less harmful than something like cocaine or heroin or meth, but we believe that marijuana will lead to these things. And there was a huge debate about that because the side that was saying it's a gateway kind of misrepresented how much of a gateway it was. And the side that was, pretty enthusiastic about marijuana took offense to the misrepresentation and often kind of overcorrected in the other direction and said, not only is it not a gateway, it cures cancer. It's everything. You take a little hit of this and boy, everything's better. And it's a performance-enhancing drug. Everything's good. And both sides were really inaccurate. And for a long time, we were kind of caught in the middle. But we've been saying this for a long time. It is not the case that marijuana is harmless, okay? People say, oh, but it's natural. So is gravity, stupid. But if you use it in the wrong amount at the wrong time, you'll find that gravity will kill you. And marijuana is not a drug that you can necessarily overdose on and go into cardiac failure while you're smoking it. But it does have health consequences. And what this study is telling us is that for those who are using it in adolescence, it increases the odds that they will continue using other mood-altering substances. And as a therapist, I look at that and I am not at all surprised, because what you're essentially doing in that young age is you're beginning to deal with your life using this external thing. The rest of us are coping and going through a maturing process and growing up and trying to learn how to deal with life on life's terms, and we're having to adapt new skills in our psychology to deal with this. But for the person who starts using this external substance, it's a mood-altering substance. And even if it's less harmful than cocaine or heroin, doesn't mean you're not still cheating the brain out of valuable life development so that it can continue to grow and become an adult.
Yeah, and I mean, my stance on this has always been I'm way more concerned about the developing brain.
Right.
Obviously, marijuana is not a benign substance. It has effects, obviously, otherwise no one would be using it.
Right.
But to me, it all goes back to brain development.
Right.
We only get one shot at our brain,
yes,
at developing it.
Yes.
I'm in my late 30s.
Oh my God, you're so old.
I've never said late 30s before.
Say it now.
That hurt. But when I was working with the teenagers, I would ask them, whose brain do you think I would rather have, mine or yours? And they were always like, well, probably yours. You've got the college education and all that. And I said, no, I would rather have yours because mine's done. It will never develop further than where it is now, right? I love playing guitar. Well, I didn't start playing guitar until I was about 22. Mm-hmm. These kids who picked it up when they were 8, 9, 10 years old are phenomenal at it. Yeah. And a big part of this has to do with this thing that we call synaptic pruning.
Right, neuroplasticity.
Right. So our brain adapts and it creates thousands and millions, billions of connections.
Right.
Right. But then what happens in these teenage years, it goes through this synaptic pruning process where just like pruning a bush, it starts cutting off connections that aren't needed.
Right.
So the thicker the connection means the more used it is. Mm-hmm. And if it's thicker, then it survives that process. Everything else gets cut, but that stays. So when we start talking about how does this affect language? Well, if you learn a language as a child, you're going to have better success as an adult. If you learn a sport or if you learn a musical instrument, because it survives that process and it gets strengthened.
And so if you're exposing an adolescent developing brain to a psychoactive substance, even if it's not the worst psychoactive substance, it induces euphoria. It's a mind and mood altering chemical, and it ultimately affects the hardware of the brain.
Absolutely, yeah. And so now you have fundamentally changed that part of the brain. It does rewire that reward circuitry involved.
It is more responsive now to the effect of a mind-altering psychoactive substance, which is why this data says, in fact, you're more likely to develop a drug dependence down the line to marijuana, to alcohol, to anything if you experimented with this at a very young age. And that's why the age barometer of 21 is in there for alcohol and marijuana. So let's pivot now. So the big question here about gatewayness, is it a gateway? Yes, stupid. Anybody who said it wasn't was always wrong. Alcohol is too. Any mind-altering substance that you begin dabbling with inherently teaches you to alter your mind. If you enjoyed that, that is your entryway into the mind-altering stuff catalog. So yeah, it's inherently an onboarding of anything. That is not the reason that you should ban something, though. Right? Because if the big standard of whether or not to ban something is its gatewayness, then alcohol has no business being legal.
Well, then
this
tobacco,
whole time.
you throw tobacco in there too.
Throw out anything throw out caffeine. So like that alone is not an inherent problem enough that you would ban something, right? Banning something comes down to its ill effects on the human health to the point that the state should get involved. So, Nick, you and I have had to be part of this conversation in the last 2 years, the question of marijuana being legalized. You and I are part of the team that's supposed to clean it up whenever people can't deal with it. There's the community gets to throw the party. We're the cleanup crew. We're the janitors who clean up the people that, partied too hard, and couldn't stop. So yeah, we inherently have a little bit of a bias because we're usually the guys having to deal with the aftermath that nobody thinks about. But Nick, let me ask you this: weigh in on the legalization of marijuana. Pro or con? Are you for it or against it?
I honestly, I'm neutral with conditions.
Okay,
I guess that's how I would describe my position.
Okay, what are your conditions?
We need to put more education and information out into the public about how it affects a developing brain.
Yes.
And that the legality of it as an adult does not mean it's harmless for an adolescent.
Right.
And one of the things that I would say to parents when they were bringing their kids in for an evaluation or something, saying like, well, I don't really see the marijuana as harmful for my 15-year-old.
Right.
So I said, well, would it be harmful for your 7-year-old?
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no, that's crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, why?
Why? Yeah. Why?
The same thing.
Yeah.
The same issues you would have with a 7-year-old is the same thing. I mean, we're still talking about brain development. Our brain kind of starts to slow down around age 21. It's usually done by 25. So that's the brain that you're left with.
So legalization that says 21 years old or older, you're more comfortable with than carte blanche legalization, which is good because everywhere it's legalized, it's always 21 or older.
Right.
But you would also like to see socially for people to be better educated about it.
Yes, I would love for some kind of information to be taught and real information, not scare tactics.
Yes.
Because we know that doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. So I'll give you my piece on this. So we had to endure a barrage of commercials whenever this proposition was in front of our assembly and in front of our voting republic. And there was one line of argument that the marijuana enthusiasts were making that really bothered me, and I was not okay with it. And I thought it was the wrong line of argument to make. And there was another line of argument which I thought was a slam dunk and got me completely on their side. So the first one that I was repulsed by was when they were saying, hey, this is medicine. You're talking about whether or not we should legalize medicine. And they would put up a veteran with PTSD in the commercial, and he would talk about how horrific his life was and nightmares and problems, and then he'd say, now I smoke weed and everything's great, but you want to make me a criminal. And that was problematic for me, right? Because I work in an entire sector of healthcare designed to address that guy, and I have never once seen anybody's PTSD symptoms forever solved by just introducing pot. Or even introducing just a medicine. Usually it requires intense psychotherapy, and I'm part of that process. And so whenever they were trying to carry around a flag of weed is always medicinal and is probably the best kept secret in the history of mankind, it was so hyperbolic and so disinterested in all the complexity and nuance of medicine that it bothered me. But they still have a point, right? Because if you talk to a weed enthusiast, they say, but Jim, the FDA is not allowed to test the utility of cannabis. They're not allowed to. It's a forbidden fruit. So don't you think it deserves to be tested? In which case I would take a very scientific approach and say, yes, all options welcome to the testing process. I agree that restriction needs to be lifted. And now let's subjective to the proper scrutiny of the FDA and figuring out whether or not it's effective in certain doses for certain conditions. Yes. But right now we're taking your word for it. We're not taking the FDA's word for it. We're taking anecdotal evidence, which is how cocaine started, Nick. Freud was giving people cocaine. Docs used to give you shots of whiskey, or vodka and say that had therapeutic value. And over time, we realized that was not the best and most sensitive and informed way to approach a problem. So that line of argument really super bothered me and made me feel like, screw all this. I don't want it anywhere. But then the second argument really compelled me. That was the side. There was actually a lobby created called Regulate Weed as Alcohol. And their point was, treat it exactly the same. Make rules, regulate it, create a bureau to oversee it, tax it, and inform the public exactly of its bads and its acceptabilities. This is a recreational, harmful substance that we're allowing in certain amounts in a responsible way. If you've done that for alcohol, and we've already had this conversation, and the decision has already been made that in the United States of America, we allow a harmful substance to be used recreationally because we see that the pros can outweigh the cons. But we totally also know that it's not perfect. And that argument won me because I said, yeah, you're right. Like, as an American, you have the liberty to go out and buy Jack Daniel's whiskey. And if you abuse that, that's on you. And I'm here to clean up the mess if you can't handle it. But you have the freedom to make that choice and to use it either responsibly or not responsibly. And the weed enthusiasts were making a very strong case in that point of, can't we at least be treated like grown-ups who can use it responsibly? And I said, now you have my attention. As long as you're framing the argument as, we use this for recreation and we are adults, okay, then I have no business with you. Go legalize it. I'm fine with that. And let's make rules to use it responsibly. And can you also advocate for the public being educated about it? Can you stop, clanging a cymbal and running around the streets talking about how it's Christ Jesus and it's a Messiah that's coming down to save everybody? Like, don't you feel like that's a little hyperbolic? Like, it hasn't saved the world yet. It's not going to save the world once it's legalized. Let's take a step back, but enjoy it recreationally. So, my verdict on it, yes, legalize it. Legalize it with rules, legalize it with conditions, regulate it exactly as alcohol, and the public should know this is a legitimate, enjoyable, recreational, mind-altering substance. As long as that's how we describe it, I'm cool with it.
Right. Well, and part of, along with the legalization, is it being able to be studied appropriately, which I completely agree with.
Let the FDA study it. I'm curious. I want to know the results.
Well, right. I mean, even if it's, you kind of said something about, well, that's anecdotal evidence. And yes, I agree with that may be anecdotal evidence, but I still want to explore that.
Yes.
I've got somebody saying that this helps them deal with PTSD. I would like to learn more about that. I want to learn more. And because there's how many different ingredients or chemicals make up this substance.
Right.
And we don't know yet which do what.
Right. And again, I don't want to beat up on the marijuana enthusiasts all that much because I'm not the guy marching with you, but I'm also not the guy voting against you. So please don't, take issue with me and send hate mail.
So don't send your letters.
Don't send your letters. I get it.
You know what?
I got no problem with you.
We do need letters.
Send your letters. But no, to come back to it, I would feel the exact same way about creatinine or about crocodile or anything else that you can find in the world. Salvia. If you come in and there's people going, no, this really helps me. This is really important. LSD and MDMA is being broadcast right now as being helpful. There's a little bit of discussion about MDMA being useful for PTSD. Now, based on that little bit of discussion and some people saying it's been helpful, I do not know that tomorrow we should legalize it across the country, coast to coast.
Right.
That's why there's an FDA. Like, we're not supposed to be the ones as a public who get to make these broad decisions. We're supposed to have a scientific medical process that's supposed to scrutinize this stuff and be held accountable if they're wrong. So whenever weed was being brought in as this cure-all panacea in medicine, that bugged me. But when it was re-represented as a recreational thing that grown-ups should be allowed to use, I thought, yeah, I can't argue with that. Like, the grown-ups I know who use this recreationally and responsibly, nothing wrong with them. And I don't stigmatize them. I don't think less of them. I don't care. Mm-hmm. And then I also know people that can abuse it, but I also know alcoholics who abuse alcohol. That doesn't mean we make alcohol illegal. That was a strong argument, and ultimately it won my vote.
But I'm really interested what you, our listeners, think.
Yeah,
if
give
we're
us some
wrong,
feedback.
Let us know.
Call us out.
Yeah, we can handle it.
Open the floodgates. Let the hate flow.
The floodgates have been open for a long time.
Yeah, they have been open. So send those in. We'll take your stuff.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about diagnosing yourself with OCD. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and we are going to dive into our listener mail. And this first question is about obsessive compulsive disorder, or what the public usually calls OCD. Here's the question. Diagnosed myself as OCD, but therapist says I might just have generalized anxiety disorder. So recently, I've been going through a cycle of guilt and anxiety over somewhat regrettable things done in the past, with the fear I may have done something inexcusable to someone, with my mind going all over the place and asking questions here and there, and me constantly seeking reassurance despite no evidence that I've done any harm to anybody. I diagnosed it as real event OCD, since it matched so much with my predicament. However, my therapist instead diagnosed me as having generalized anxiety disorder, which does kind of share the symptoms as OCD, except I don't do rituals, like walk in a circle repeatedly or other repetitive tasks to make the thoughts go away, which is true. Would you think that is a fair assessment?
I guess, yeah, I would. I mean, from the little information that I've got, I would think that's a fair assessment. I would hope that the therapist that diagnosed this knows what they're talking about. Everything that you've described to me doesn't really sound like OCD, but again, like we're almost kind of offering a second opinion on something, which I don't know if I really feel comfortable doing, because we don't obviously have all the information. But that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, so a couple of pieces on that, especially this part about second opinioning. So this is one of the rare questions that is actually saying, hey, people who have licenses to treat and diagnose problems, would you agree with the doctor or the therapist in my situation and confirm their diagnosis or dispute it? We are reluctant to do that because at the end of the day, when we tell you that we really are licensed people that do psychology, we really mean that. And so we have to start with a caveat of, friend who wrote this, you should absolutely continue to work with your real-life therapist who's really evaluating you and is in front of you. However, your question sets the stage for Nick and I to maybe discuss what is OCD and what is generalized anxiety disorder, because we know there's a lot of psychology enthusiasts who listen to our show. So whenever we diagnose somebody with one of these disorders, there's this process we go through called differential diagnosis. Differential diagnosis is how we know the difference between a hippo and a rhino. So if you see like the silhouette of a big gray figure on the African plains, you might say that's definitely a rhino. But we're not sure it's not a hippo. They're similar, but they're different, right? So differential diagnosis is how you squint at it and have different ways of sort of measuring that silhouette so that you can more probably assess whether it's the first thing or the second thing. OCD and anxiety have a lot in common because anxiety is sort of this intrusive thinking and this obsession that can happen that causes physical ailment, right? Or it causes all these other kinds of pieces that you're having to deal with that are becoming intrusive in your life. Obsessive and compulsive disorder is very similar because you're overthinking about something. You can't break your mind away from it. That's the obsessive part, and then you behave in reaction to those thoughts, which is the compulsive part. And that's the cycle that we find you getting stuck in. If you open up the DSM-5 and you go into the OCD chapter, the first thing I want to point out is the writer says, I diagnosed myself as having, quote, real event OCD. Writer, there is no diagnosis called real event OCD. There is only OCD, and there are specifiers like with tics or things like that, or with good insight or poor insight, but there is no such disorder called real event OCD.
Yeah, I just Googled that.
Yeah, that's not a thing.
I had not heard of that.
No.
It's a thing on the internet.
Yeah,
It's not a thing in the DSM-5.
No, that is not something that medicine would describe. Real event OCD is not a thing. And here's part of the reason why your therapist probably ended up going onto the side of generalized anxiety disorder. In the differential diagnosis chapter on obsessive and compulsive disorder, one of the things it talks about to help you figure out, is this a rhino or is this a hippo, is it says, hey, OCD tends to be about almost magical things. It tends to not be rooted in reality. So there's a very prominent person on the internet named John Green. John Green is very open about having obsessive and compulsive disorder. He's the guy who wrote best-selling books like The Fault in Our Stars and Searching for Alaska. And he's got a hit YouTube channel called Vlogbrothers that he does with his brother Hank Green. And he's behind all sorts of really great educational YouTube channels like Crash Course and other great things. He has a podcast called The Anthropocene, and it's just fantastic. So I really like John Green, and he's a huge advocate for mental health, and he lives with obsessive and compulsive disorder. An example from his life to teach you what OCD is, he will go to Chipotle and he'll watch the man making his burrito, and he will think, there's probably invisible flesh-eating bacteria on that carne asada that I am going to eat eat and it's going to kill me. And now he's obsessing about that thought over and over and over again. And now as he's eating it, he's compulsively wanting to go wash it or wash his hands or throw it away and make another one or throw it away and make another one and do that over and over again. Or he wants to ask everybody there to wash their hands 25 times. That would get so in his head that after he eats the burrito, he feels the need to go vomit it back up because now he feels in danger. He's obsessing about the flesh-eating bacteria. He believes it's possible, and now he wants to go vomit it up, and now he can't eat. So then he starts losing weight because everything he sees, he thinks, oh my God, it might have that flesh-eating bacteria on it. How do I know that that's not true? That is a real thing that can happen. Flesh-eating bacteria does exist. Chipotle is a real place. But it is magical thinking in the sense that it is not probable. You don't have good reasons for thinking this, and it's not rooted in what we call reality. So in the differential diagnosis chapter of OCD, one of the flags they're looking for is this obsessive thinking about something that has that magical, not realistic quality to it, or did this stuff really happen and you're just kind of stuck on it? In your case, this stuff really happened. These are real things that happened in your human conversations and interactions. You're bothered by it and you are having intrusive thoughts about it. That's well within the scope of what we would consider generalized anxiety disorder. Now, please understand, generalized anxiety disorder is not a lesser disorder than OCD. They are different, okay? Just like a hippo is different than a rhino, but both can kill you. Like both should be considered a danger to you. So having GAD is not necessarily less. It just means we're going to approach all of it differently.
And as I've said before, I think this is like the most commonly self-diagnosed condition. Everybody feels they have it.
Yes.
Most people, when you actually look at the DSM-5, don't.
Yeah, OCD is something people throw around like I did my dishes too much, or, you know, I insist on only wearing a pair of jeans once before I clean them, or, you know, I have to get my car washed every day, and they'll laugh and say I'm OCD. And that's fine, because we also do the same thing like, you know, I squash a bug and I go, I'm a murderer. Like, it's hyperbolic. I know I'm not, right? And that's fine if we're using it in a teasing way. But there's some people that really sit around and think, oh my gosh, do I really have this disorder? I count the stairs when I go up the stairs. I just have a habit of counting, or I count how many floors I'm on in an elevator. Is that OCD? Again, Nick and I are always looking at, is there a clinically significant amount of distress? If there's not, nope, there's no such thing as a disorder. If there is, then yeah, we're going to get into the weeds on it. Good job seeing a therapist, writer. Good job looking at it. I am not offering you a clinical second opinion. Neither is Nick, because that is not something we would do through a podcast. I am educating you about what is obsessive compulsive disorder, what is generalized anxiety disorder, and what is differential diagnosis. And I encourage you to continue doing your research, but also lean in on your therapist, because the good news is whatever he offers as far as help and support and techniques is going to be helpful no matter what those symptoms are. With that, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to talk about irrational jealousy. You are listening to Pod Therapy.
Okay, welcome back. And we are going to dive into our next listener mail. I get irrationally jealous when friends hang out without me.
You know who wrote this in? Mindy Kaling. The woman from, she has a whole book called Why Are My Friends Hanging Out Without Me and Other Irrational Fears.
Oh, really?
My wife loves that book.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, okay, well, do we even need to read it?
Yeah.
I guess just read that book. We're good.
Just read the book. We're fine.
All right, I'll read it anyway. I'm insecure and tend to feel jealous/rejected when people choose to hang out with other friends. I realize this is completely unreasonable. Everyone has other friends, myself included, and therefore I would love to be able to feel normal about this kind of thing. Does anyone have any suggestions as to how I can feel more at ease when I'm not someone's first choice every time? To clarify, these friends are good people, we have good relationships, etc. It's not a situation where I'm actively being left out of things.
Good question, Mindy Kaling. Thank you so much for writing in. And congratulations on your hit TV shows.
I knew you were a listener.
I knew she was a listener. So first thought on this, Nick, what a great question to practice CBT on. In previous episodes, we've been talking about cognitive behavioral therapy. And, you know, we've explained a little bit about some of what it does. But underneath this, it's not the event that matters, right?
Correct.
It's her belief about the event.
It's the meaning that she gives the event.
Yes.
Right. So seeing other friends hanging out with other people, it's not that they're hanging out with other people. It's what does it mean to you? What is the meaning that you assign that? That is what's causing this internal struggle, which this is a good thing because that means that the solution is within you.
Yes.
If there's ever a problem to have, we want the solution to be internal.
Yes.
Because if the solution is external, there's no guarantee that we're ever going to get it. If the solutions to all my problems are Jim changing his behavior,
Right.
forget it. I'm never going to arrive at a solution. But if my solution is me changing the way I think, changing the way that I see the world, that's awesome.
Yes.
This is good news because that means I'm in control of it.
That's huge.
I can manipulate
And
it.
you could replace some of the pieces of this question. It could have been my boyfriend hangs out with his friends and I feel jealous. It could be my friends in this case. It could be my coworker didn't invite me out to lunch and always seems to invite somebody else. And I feel jealous or I feel this or I feel that. Super valuable because it has nothing to do with what this person's doing usually. There's times when we have to address boundaries and correct behavior inside of a relationship. But in this case, Nick's perfectly right. The cause of the clinically significant amount of distress or the cause of the problem is your interpretation of the action, not the action itself. So anytime you hear the word jealousy in yourself, that means inherently it's a you thing and we need to evaluate the meaning that it has. So Nick, in this case, what I hear her saying, what I hear Mindy Kaling, famous TV star who writes into Pod Therapy saying is, you know what? I feel jealous when my friends hang out without me. I realize that's completely unreasonable. They are good people, but I still feel like I'm being left out. I'm not their first choice. And her question is, does anyone have any suggestions as to how I could feel more at ease when I'm not someone's first choice? So let's offer some of that. You know, one little nugget that I'll toss as far as advice is to evaluate that first concept, first choice. You know, perhaps it's not first choice, perhaps it's Tuesday's choice, right? Because Nick is a friend of mine in certain capacities. If I'm looking to have fellowship with a friend and what I really want to do today is take our kids to the park and then to a Disney movie, I'm not calling Nick.
Thank you.
Yeah, he puts clothes on his dog. It's very awkward for all of us. He's got this beagle in like a baby carriage, and it's very weird.
I don't know what to do around children.
Yeah, he doesn't know what to do around children. And he comes, we go to the park and he says very awkward things. He says, how about that most recent Disney movie? And it's like, what? So he tries to fit in and he doesn't. So he's not my hanging out with kids friend, but Nick is definitely like a hockey friend, right? Because we both love our hockey team, the Golden Knights. And so I'll text him and talk to him about that. Maybe you're somebody's Tuesday friend, but not their Monday friend. Or maybe you're the friend that they really want to hang out with when they're in the mood to talk about certain things, but maybe you're not their sushi friend. That's another thing is who's your sushi friend? That's a really big deal.
My sushi wingman.
Yeah. Sushi's a team effort.
Yeah, if you're doing all you can eat, you have to have somebody who can bail you out.
It's funny because I've had that situation happen where I was in the mood for sushi and I went out with one friend and not the other, and we hung out without that third friend. And third friend's like, "Wow, why didn't you guys invite me? Is there something going on?" And we tried to explain, like, no, you don't understand. Sushi's not a social thing. Okay, you're not doing this because you like yourself or you like other people. It's something you do quietly. There's no eye contact.
It's a quest.
It's a quest.
So, yeah, and I that's great advice. The thing that I would encourage our listener to do is take yourself out of the situation and reverse roles. Okay, so you said everyone has other friends, myself included. Mm-hmm. So when you make a decision to hang out with one friend, does that mean that the other friends are less important to you?
Right.
Does that mean that they're not your first choice? Because I think if you looked at it from that situation, your argument breaks down. The way that you look at it, all of a sudden you start saying, well, no, that's not the case.
Right.
So if it's not the case in the way that you think about it, it's fair to say that it's not the case that that's how they think about it.
I agree. Yeah, the same rules apply. And, another piece of CBT that we use for people all the time is we ask them a series of questions to help them process that to come to a real conclusion. So one of the questions we're likely to ask you is if you had a friend in the exact same situation, what would you tell them? If they called you and like, oh my gosh, my coworkers aren't hanging out with me. They went out without me again. Do they not like me? What's the thing? You would probably tell them to calm down, like, hey, stop. That's not what it is. There's 8 billion humans on the planet, right? And another question we challenge you to ask is this question of evidence. So I often ask you to imagine a little cartoon judge. I usually use Judge Judy. And, ask that judge to weigh the evidence for and against, right? And imagine yourself presenting that evidence and saying, well, I feel like they don't like me. I suspect these things. And the judge going, that's not how courts work, dude. You can't just bring me me like, I suspect that the OJ made the murder. Like, that's not good. Like, you need to show me the bloody glove. Like, you need to show me the smoking gun. Where's the hard evidence beyond a reasonable doubt? Innocence until proven guilty. Prove the guilt of these people. They don't like you. Prove it. Well, they didn't invite me. Okay, did they look at you and say, we don't like you? Have they said something scornful? Have they texted you something mean? Or are they just not available? Well, there's an absence of them in my life. Okay, that's not enough. That's not enough to convict.
That could mean anything.
That's not enough. But when you put it on trial and you do the pros and the cons and you actually weigh out both sides of the case fairly, more often than not, you'll find yourself feeling relief afterward, and I think you'll take away a lot of those pangs of jealousy.
And my feedback to this may not be specific to this particular writer, but just for all of our listeners out there, if you are evaluating your own thought process, here's a really cool technique too. If you're wondering whether or not your thoughts are grounded in facts or really, what's the word I'm looking for? But like if you can count on them, right? So one of the therapists that I used to work with when we worked with teenagers, he would do this thing with the kids where he would have them, kind of keep track of their self-talk, this internal dialogue that they would have. And what he would challenge them to do is when you have a thought that you're not really sure if it's a distorted thought or not, replay that thought in your head, but through the voice of Cartman from South Park. Right? Because and it's a really cool technique. Because
so the same thing you're saying to yourself.
Yeah, this internal dialogue. They don't like me. I'm not their first choice. Blah blah blah.
I'm not the first choice.
Play that thought. That's a horrible Cartman.
Oh,
by the
it was
way.
dead on.
But play that thought through the voice of Cartman.
Okay.
Because Cartman in South Park, he is notorious for being wrong. Like everything he says,
whatever he says
he's
is
just
wrong.
The opposite is going to happen.
Okay.
Right? And so when you phrase it and you put it in that context, then you can kind of see, oh, okay, yeah. I know this is crazy.
Wow. That is a great technique.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my gosh, we should use that in therapy. We should play a video of him doing something stupid and then teach them all to speak in a Cartman voice in their mind.
Right.
Oh, that's genius. So Mindy Kaling, famous actress, thank you so much for writing in, and thank you for playing along. And also, don't forget to use that Cartman voice because I'm sure you have a better imitation than I do. That's all the time we've got for this week's session. Thank you to all of those of you who contributed to our show today, including actress Mindy Kaling. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy or on Twitter @podtherapyguys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Dr. Jimbo.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week. Visit pa.gov.